And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. Yesterday and last night, we heard a lot about the Democratic Party because the first of two Democratic debates took place on Tuesday night. Another one takes place tonight, 10 in each venue. I might just mention that this is also a coming out party for some and a saying goodbye party for many others, because the next debates that will be taking place require a higher standard in terms of whether or not you get at least 2% from 4 different surveys or polls. You have a certain number of supporters. So far, only 8 have qualified. I think there may be some others that may, but at the moment, that 25 is already down to 20 on the stage. The 20 on the stage already are down to 8 if that continues. And so there is a sense in which that is part of what obviously happens even before a primary takes place. The primaries are supposed to do that, but we learned certainly 4 years ago at this time that there were a number of people that before they even had their first debate had dropped out, and after they had their first debate dropped out, and that was winnowing the field rather dramatically. The theme for last night was that math and emotions don't mix. And that's not my phrase. That's the phrase by our good friend Jim Garrity. He says, a lesson from the Democratic debate, math and emotions don't mix. As a matter of fact, he goes on later to say that the worst enemy for Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders is math. What he means is it doesn't add up. So we'll get into some of that, and those are some conversations we'll have. I'm not going to spend all my time this hour on the Democrat debate, but since it took place last night, that's certainly front and center. A little bit later, we'll talk about Babylon Bee, and you might say, why? Well, that'll be more obvious as we get into this. Also, the tremendous amount of fact-checking that has had to take place because of all sorts of statements that are made that are erroneous. There's been a lot of fact-checking on the president for many years. Now, all of a sudden, the Democrats are a little bit upset because the Associated Press, among others, is doing fact-checking on them and finding that a lot of their comments just aren't true. You are always entitled to your own opinion, but you're not entitled to your own facts. And that's a phrase we've used around here many years. And certainly, I am not the first person to have brought that up. As a matter of fact, a very prominent senator by the name of Daniel Patrick Moynihan first, I think, coined that years ago, and we're going to continue using that all through this election season. So we'll talk about that as well. Next hour, let me just let you know that Carlos and Susanne Hidalgo will be with us. We'll be talking about their new book, The Un-American Dream. Looking forward to meeting them. Only got the book today, so I'll do my best to try to give them a good opportunity to explain their story, but I won't bring the kind of expertise I normally are able to do so when I have a chance to get the book, read it, and digest it, but we'll do our best with that. And then in the third hour, which we broadcast nationally, but you may not hear on your local station, I will have Gary Bauer with us, and since he is a former presidential candidate, I want to get his thoughts about the kind of challenge that any presidential candidate faces, especially in the Democrat Party right now. And so we'll, of course, give you a chance as well to ask questions or make comments in that time as well. So even if you can't hear it on your local station, you can go to pointofview.net and listen to it or watch it, or you can go to Facebook Live. And by the way, if any of you want to leave some notes on Facebook Live of your assessment of the Democrat debate last night, or questions that you'd like me to address, those are fine. Of course, if you'd like to give us a call, that number is always 1-800-351-1212. Well, I mentioned Jim Garrity. Let's give him his due for just a minute, because it is a very good piece in which he says the assessment of the rest of the mainstream media is that last night featured Elizabeth Warren against less progressive foes, and that Warren won handily. The line everyone is quoting is Warren's response to John Delaney, Congressman Delaney. I don't understand why anybody goes to all the trouble of running for president of the United States just to talk about what we really can't do and shouldn't fight for. Okay, step back and you see a media myth being created before your eyes. Everyone's talking about the zinger. Nobody can remember that allegedly unambitious agenda from Delaney that spurred the response. And that is what he said is, here's his comment, I think Democrats win. We run on real solutions, not impossible promises. When we run on things that are workable, not fairy tale economics. Oh, that really got under her skin. Look at the story of Detroit, this amazing city that we're in. The city is turning around because the government and the private sector are working well together. It has been our model going forward. We need to encourage collaboration between the government, the private sector, and the nonprofit sector, and focus on those kitchen table pocketbook issues that matter to hardworking Americans, building infrastructure, creating jobs, improving their pay, creating universal health care, and lowering drug prices. That could be said by any of the common sense Democrats that have run in the past. It could be said by virtually any Republican candidate. But that is what caused Elizabeth Warren to explode over him. And so that's where Jim Garrity said, that's what makes Delaney such a naysayer and cynic. If the next president built up America's infrastructure, created jobs, improved take-home pay, created universal health care, and lowered drug prices, would you look at that legacy and lament how timid and unambitious it was? Or would you say, wow, that was an amazing presidency. I can't believe we got so much done. And I think it just illustrates the fact that what is happening is that when some individuals, it can be the governor from Montana, it can be a congressman from Ohio, it can be whoever it might be, says, whoa, wait a minute, this might be political suicide. And you have two of the most leading progressives. Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez was not on the stage, but you got basically her ideas spouted by Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, and that is seen as unambitious. And so that's kind of the interesting thing. Now, again, to give Delaney his due, he says many times, I've done the math and it doesn't add up, or his math is wrong. And, of course, the progressives hate him for this, he says. Everyone wants their presidential campaign to be about brighter tomorrows and daring proposals and sunnier horizons and bold visions and all of that, but it doesn't change the math. Delaney may have exaggerated when he said that enacting Medicare for all would lead to all hospitals shutting down, but tomorrow, to analyze what is said tonight, we're going to have Dr. Merrill Matthews, and I would have to say that one of the leading experts really in the country is Dr. Matthews. There are a few people that I like to go to talk about medical issues and health care policy, and he's one of those, and he'll be with us tomorrow. And he'll point out that it may not shut down all the hospitals, but it's certainly going to require the government maybe to take over the hospitals and force them to operate in a very different kind of way if indeed you're going to be paying those hospitals a much smaller percentage for the operations that they are engaging in and the services that they are providing. And he says, according to the Department of Health and Human Services, more than 2/3 of the hospitals are losing money on Medicare inpatient services, and the average Medicare inpatient hospital margin was a minus 9.9%, basically a minus 10%. So you're losing 10% every patient, by average, that you have in there. So you're losing money. You're not breaking even. You're losing money. I know that's hard for Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders to understand, but if you're losing money on every Medicare patient, and then you want to implement a Medicare pay structure, as I said, do the math. I got a lot more to say, but we're up against a break, so we'll come back with more right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, the contemporary issues of abortion, euthanasia, homosexuality, transgenderism, and the hookup culture seem very different, but they all illustrate in different ways a secular hostility to the human body. That is the premise of the new book by Nancy Pearcey with the title Love Thy Body. She was on my radio program recently to explain how each of these issues goes back to a flawed perspective of our bodies. Supporters of abortion say that the fetus is not a person, even though it is biologically human. Personhood theory attempts to split facts and values by ignoring basic biological facts. Homosexual activists disconnect sexuality from biological identity. This is not liberating, but actually denigrates who we are as persons. Transgenderism detaches gender from biology and also has a tendency to demean the body. And the hookup culture is often criticized for putting too much value on the physical dimension of sex. Actually, it puts too little because it only focuses on the physical and not on the emotional and spiritual as well. Nancy Pearcey wrote this book to call out those who try to argue that Christians and conservative people are anti-science. Actually, it is the secular progressive worldview that has to turn away from science in order to maintain its worldview. She also wrote the book to help Christians get beyond the negative responses. Often we're known for what we're against. We say, it's wrong, or don't do it. We need to offer a positive message, and that is another value of the book. We should also realize that these false ideas of the body aren't just outside the church, they're found inside the church as well. She provides various statistics and examples to illustrate the need for all Christians to think biblically about every area of life. This book will help you go beyond the politically correct slogans of our culture and begin to see the world from a biblical perspective. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Anti-Semitism, go to viewpoints.info/antisemitism. Viewpoints.info/antisemitism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, let's work out the math, and we'll move on to some other issues. It is interesting, one of the people over at Reason, which kind of looks at some of the costs and then tries to analyze those in terms of what it might mean in terms of policy, calculates that Elizabeth Warren wants to spend $2.75 trillion in new wealth taxes on $3.26 trillion in spending. Oops, it doesn't even balance in that regard. When you use the trillion, it doesn't look so bad. So he says, let's rephrase that. After enacting a giant new tax hike, she wants to spend $51 billion more, and she continues to insist her taxes will only hit billionaires and big corporations. So anybody that said, okay, let's get my calculator out here, let's do an estimate. And by the way, let me just say that every time I give an estimate here, I probably have to give the disclaimer, any estimate that at least the government gives you is always too low. Find me any government program that came in under budget. And the closest one that I can even come up with is when they added Medicare Part D. It did do better than people expected, but the cost of Medicare, Medicaid, the cost of the war on poverty, you could add an extra zero to the estimates and be at least closer to the ballpark. So many of these estimates probably are ratcheted down. Reason may be a little closer, but nevertheless, that's the case. David Graham writes that Elizabeth Warren seems to be focusing on emotion. Yeah, no kidding. I love what he says. Every presidential candidate prefers to focus on emotion. Obama talked about hope and yes, we can. Trump vented his spleen and offered a vision of America that is great again. Every candidate wants to focus on emotion because it's easier than getting the math to add up. You would think the electorate would learn after getting so many consecutive cycles of believing in the next great inspiring hope and then be disappointed by the results. But anyway, the point that Jim Garrity is making here, and it's a good point, is the math does not add up. I'm hoping somewhere along the line that the American voters say to themselves, this just doesn't work. I mean, I would like a unicorn, but there are no unicorns. I'd like a balanced budget, but we don't have balanced budgets. I'd like to believe that government will provide better services than the private sector, but I haven't seen any evidence of that, and on and on and on. Those are the kinds of questions that are indeed the case. One of the other articles here, Warren and Sanders versus the moderates. This really was a debate last night, if you think, between what is the core of the Democrat Party. Is it going to be a progressive party, which it certainly has become, or is it going to be pulled back a little bit by some of those lesser-known candidates, John Delaney being a good example, former member of Congress from Maryland, and others that were simply raising some very good questions. And the point is that will surface, no doubt, tonight, because there are going to be a few times when I'm thinking that Joe Biden is going to try to present himself as kind of the voice of common sense, and he will certainly face an attack from, I'm guessing at least, Kamala Harris and Julian Castro and a few others, of not having a bold enough idea. But we'll see where that takes us. And again, when you have people like John Delaney, who's been a member of Congress, calling it fairy tale economics, I'm here to tell you that those kinds of ideas do get caught up sooner or later. You know, when indeed George Herbert Walker Bush ran against Ronald Reagan and talked about, again, you know, this voodoo economics, that phrase stayed around for a long period of time. John Delaney, not wanting to use that phrase, came up with the fairy tale economics, and I don't think that is going to evaporate. It might even show up again tonight, and certainly, don't you think, Republicans will be quite willing to use that in the future. So again, some of the other arguments being made, let's give at least some shout-outs to a few other of the underperformers who I think will maybe not make the next stage, but we're trying to raise some questions as well. Amy Klobuchar and, of course, the ex-governor from Colorado, John Hickenlooper, they're both below 2%. So if indeed nothing changes from their debate performance last night, that is it for them. She said, I have bold ideas, but they're grounded in reality. The idea of evolution, not revolution, and some of those. And of course, Mayor Pete Buttigieg will probably still make it. He says, I don't care how old you are. I care about your vision. And so that is part of it as well. And then when there was all sorts of criticism of the bill, at one point, Bernie Sanders said, I do understand that. I wrote the blank bill. A little bit later, well, might as well just pick it out right now. Just it's worth mentioning from time and time again, because what was being pointed out by the congressman from Maryland, the congressman from Ohio, and a variety of others, is that this would take away your insurance. And the argument that came back from Bernie Sanders is, no, it won't. And you've got to understand, Bernie Sanders, quote, wrote the bill. Let's face it, his staff did, but okay, wrote the bill. Elizabeth Warren, Kristen Gillibrand, who we'll see tonight, Kamala Harris, who we'll see tonight, Cory Booker, who we see tonight, they were all co-sponsors of this. So they own the bill. Section 107, prohibition against duplicating coverage. And it says a private health insurer to sell health insurance that duplicates the benefits, it's unlawful to do so. It's unlawful for an employer to provide benefits for an employee, former employee, or dependents of an employee. And number 3, it's also unlawful for this to, and it says nothing that's actually be construed as prohibiting the sale of health insurance coverage for any additional benefits not covered by the Act. But if indeed you have insurance, and this could be anything, I want to break this up maybe in the third hour when we talk about the fact that a lot of Christians don't have insurance, but it would be considered insurance if you have like Medishare, Samaritan's Ministry, whatever, which is a health sharing kind of idea. It's duplicative, and as a result, it would be unlawful. So this argument that's being made that what you're trying to do is take insurance away from millions of Americans, which is dismissed very quickly by Bernie Sanders, is actually pretty accurate. And it was, I think, telling that you had a number of individuals saying, why do we want to change all of this? If somebody likes the insurance they have, they can keep the insurance they have. But instead, you got to appreciate Bernie Sanders for his honesty, because basically what he's saying is if you like the insurance you have, you will not be allowed to keep the insurance you have. You will have to have the government covering you instead. And so I thought that was kind of interesting indeed. When we come back from the break, I do want to talk about some of the questions that were proposed that should have been asked. And I'll give credit, at least partial credit, to some of the CNN moderators who did ask somewhat tougher questions than we saw last time in the other debate, the MSNBC debate. But nevertheless, here are 7 takeaways real quickly from CNN itself. Number 1, Warren and Sanders swat away their critics. Well, we'll see. Number 2, no daylight between Warrens and Sanders. I mean, these are 2 individuals that pretty much agree on almost everything, and I'll come back with the questions to talk about that. Number 3, the momentary star was Marianne Williamson. She's the author of Course in Miracles, but she talked about this idea of a dark psychic force, and some people have said that she may have been a person who had the most number of kind of Google searches last night, because I think a lot of people said, whoa, who is this woman? Well, she doesn't bring anything in terms of political expertise to the table, but after all, having some of the other candidates in the past haven't either. But nevertheless, it seems like she's out of her element. But nevertheless, that was one of the things that came from her comment. The attempt to seek middle ground, of course, that gets into John Delaney and Hickenlooper and the Montana governor, Steve Bullock, which was the first time to see him, and a couple of others, as well as Beto O'Rourke and Pete Buttigieg. They were all trying to find some middle ground on health care. Number 5, arguments for reparation. This was to actually Beto O'Rourke, and he was the first Democrat on stage to argue for a step towards reparations. And then finally, you have trying to make some moments, and that was one of the other points that was there as well. So nevertheless, just a lot of things posted about the Democratic debates. But when I come back, I wanted to talk about some of the questions that would have been in the perfect scenario, would have been great questions to ask. And if you want to follow along, we have actually posted some of those. One set are by George Will, some questions for the Democratic candidates. And then another one that was put together by Steve Guest. And these 2, I think, illustrate again that even in a debate format, which isn't much of a debate, although there was pretty good interchange last night, you don't get to the really tough questions. And they would certainly serve the audience and the primary voters better if they asked some of these tough questions. So I'm going to ask some of those, knowing full well that they weren't asked last night, probably won't be asked tonight. But I wanted to at least share some of those that George Will, Steve Guest, and others have come up with. So we'll take a break. We'll come back with more right after this.
Point of View is committed to spreading the truth, oftentimes a truth that those in political power don't like getting heard. But the only way it can be heard is if our teams stand strong together, if you do what you can to support the Point of View Truth Team. It's having an impact, as we heard recently from U.S. Representative Louis Gohmert.
Everywhere I go, I hear people that you have influenced, that Point of View has affected. You have made such a difference, and you rely on people to contribute, and if they don't contribute, then that truth does not get heard.
Help Point of View make a difference. Pray and consider what level is right for you. $30, $65, $100 a month, or even more. Please do what you can. 1-800-347-5151, or visit online, pointofview.net. Look near the top right for the link that says Become a Monthly Partner. Join the Truth Team, 800-347-5151, and pointofview.net. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212, talking about the Democrat debates last night. And I'm already looking ahead to the next one because in order to qualify for this, you needed to actually get at least 1% in 3 qualifying polls. And in order to make sure that you would get in, you also had to have 65,000 or more unique donors. 14 people qualified in that regard, but 6 qualified in the first, but not the second, and that would be John Delaney, John Hickenlooper, Tim Ryan, Michael Bennett, Bill de Blasio, and Steve Bullock, who, by the way, did not participate in the June debates. Then you have 5 other individuals, because you have 25 total, who did not qualify for Detroit in a number of reasons, partially because they entered the race late, like Tom Steyer and others. But if in the next case you have to have 2% in 4 qualifying polls and have a certain number of unique donors, you know that some of the people you might have seen last night you will not see again. And the top money earner at the end of June 30th was Bernie Sanders, then Elizabeth Warren, Pete Buttigieg, John Delaney, who, of course, we talked about last night, Kamala Harris, Joe Biden, Kirsten Gillibrand, on to Beto O'Rourke, and a couple of others. So in terms of money, which is very important in campaigning nationally, but also important in terms of qualifying, this, of course, is a very important issue. But let me, for just a few minutes, mention one of the sets of questions that George Will put together. It is our first article on the website, and George Will said that it would be especially entertaining if the presidential aspirants were asked these particular questions. And I'll just give you a couple of those because it, I think, illustrates again the kind of questions that could have been asked that would have been very insightful and might have even been a little bit uncomfortable. For example, he says a question that you could have for either Elizabeth Warren or Bernie Sanders or both is 3 of Barack Obama's few large achievements were the 12-nation Trans-Pacific Partnership Trade Agreement, the Affordable Care Act, the most significant expansion of the social safety net since 1965, and Dodd-Frank, the most consequential financial sector regulation since the 1930s. You opposed ratification of the first. By advocating Medicare for all, you're implicitly saying that the second was not much. And by railing against the corruption of Wall Street banks, you imply that the third was not much. Does it follow that you think that President Obama's presidency was not much? Love the question. A question for Joe Biden tonight. Care to defend, including its deportation of 5 million illegal immigrants? This, of course, he's going to be hit on tonight, no doubt, about the fact that you are part of an administration that was actually deporting millions and millions of illegal immigrants. If it's wrong for what Donald Trump is doing right now, was it wrong for President Obama to do that? The question for Elizabeth Warren. You paused in your denunciations of crony capitalism, government favors for the well-connected, long enough to vote to revive the Export-Import Bank, which funnels capital to government-favored corporations. How do you explain that one? That one would have been a good question. Then some of these for Bernie Sanders about one individual saying that you advocated a top capital gains tax of 64%, which is, by the way, substantially higher than anything you have in Europe. It's more than double what you have in Sweden, which you're famously fond of. And you seem to think that economic equality can be conquered only by confiscating as much from the rich. Can you explain that? And I thought that was a good one. One for Senator Kamala Harris and others considering reparations for slavery. Are the 1.9 million immigrants from sub-Saharan Africa who have chosen to live in America today eligible for payments? Will you share your formula for assigning degrees of eligibility? Is the first African-American president eligible for reparations? Is his opposition to reparations yet another reason to judge him as a disappointment? You know, those would have been really good kinds of questions. For Pete Buttigieg tonight, he's the mayor. You propose a $10 billion fund reserved for racial minority entrepreneurs. Do you have a limiting principle on your policy of distributing federal funds to government-favored racial groups? for Kamala Harris tonight. You decry Donald Trump's shredding of constitutional norms, authoritarian tendencies. He has indeed used executive orders to marginalize Congress, but you promise to give Congress just 100 days to pass gun control legislation pleasing to you, or then you will resort to executive action. If you become president, must the nation get used to your situational ethics? Those are questions that were not asked last night, nor are they questions that will be asked tonight, but I think just a good illustrations as well of what's going on. And Steve Guest, I'll just pick two or three here because Baltimore's kind of been in the news lately. You know, after decades of total Democrat control in urban centers like Detroit and Baltimore, what responsibility do Democrats have for the lack of progress, rampant corruption, sky-high crime, and poverty rates? And again, another one that's related. After all, you have Barack Obama, former Mayor Catherine Pugh, and Bernie Sanders, who all talked about the problems in Baltimore, including the member of Congress that was criticized as well. Are those people all racist for those comments? And then one that, again, would be very appropriate. You're in Rashida Tlaib's home district for the debate. Last Sunday, she said Israel exists for the detriment of Palestinians. Do you agree with her repeated anti-Semitic comments? And so, again, those are questions that would be good to ask. They won't be. So even as you watch these debates or read about them later, recognize that some of the more, I think, significant things that could have been said, could have been responded to, won't surface. But we'll see if we can kind of bring some of those up. Even tomorrow, when we have Dr. Merrill Matthews with us, and in about 2 hours when we have Gary Bauer with us. But one of the other articles I've posted is about the Babylon Bee. Now, if you're not familiar, Babylon Bee is something we occasionally quote here just because first of all, we love all the things that are part of that particular site. It is meant to be as silly as it possibly can, and it's called satire. And I've said on this program many times before that Christians sometimes don't understand satire, but apparently Snopes.com doesn't either. And this piece that I've posted goes into some detail about the kind of ongoing battle between Babylon Bee and Snopes. Snopes, by the way, Babylon Bee put out one last night. Snopes already has announced that everything that the Democrats said was true. And again, that's supposed to be satire, supposed to be a joke. But the bottom line is that as we oftentimes find in Babylon Bee, they take great pleasure in making fun of Christians. And the examples he uses here: mountain climber recovering after decision to let go and let God. Man drowns while politically correct passengers describe what just went overboard. In a sign of reverence, evangelical leaders to begin writing president's name as TR-MP, not Trump. And on and on. And so when Babylon Bee makes fun of Christians, everybody laughs and just rolls their eyes and say, yeah, they deserve that. Or when they make fun of Donald Trump, there are all sorts of people cheering in that regard as well. But when they start making fun of the Democrats, that's the problem that surfaces. And this is why David French, who's been on the program with us before, says after a while it gets to be a little bit much. And Snopes finally said that they had to, for example, fact check when they said Brett Kavanaugh submits to a DNA test to prove he's not Hitler. Well, maybe that one's okay. But then when they said that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez repeatedly guessed free on a TV show The Price is Right, or when Ilhan Omar, if Israel is so innocent, then why do they insist on being Jews? You can kind of see at this point that they felt that they had to fact check it because it's okay to make fun of conservatives. It's certainly a fair game to be making fun of Christians, but it's just not fair to make fun of liberals. By the way, if you think that the Babylon Bee has any sacred cows, I got to do the VeggieTales one, right? Everybody laughing on the VeggieTales one. Supposedly, Babylon Bee said VeggieTales has introduced a new character named Cannabis Carl. That, of course, is a joke. But the fact that you have to say that to some of the people at Snopes, I think, illustrates again that we are taking ourselves entirely too seriously. And when satire doesn't come from an obvious satire site, then that's a concern. And just a couple of days ago, there was this joke that nobody got that said that Representative from Ohio, Jim Jordan's been on the program with us before, claimed on 9/11 that while Obama and Biden were cowering in fear on Air Force One, Mr. Trump was on the ground with first responders searching for survivors and pulling people to safety. Now, the point is that was supposed to be a joke, but because so many people hate, of course, our friend Jim Jordan, because of all the critical things he said about the liberals, they actually thought maybe it was true for a while, and then they had to fact check that one as well. So nevertheless, the point I'm making is, if you'd like to read this in its entirety, I love his conclusion. Hands off Babylon Bee. It's satire. If you don't get it, I'm sorry. You should be able to understand it's a joke. We'll be right back.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. Let me just mention that in the next hour, we're going to be talking with Carlos and Susanne Hidalgo about their new book, The Un-American Dream. And then Gary Bauer will be with us in the next hour as we talk about the Democrat debates. And just before we wind down this hour, I thought, since we were talking about fact check, let's again give credit where credit is due. Oftentimes, Snopes does a good job, but they do have a bias. Everybody does. They just don't tell us theirs. And we figured it out over the years that the bias is towards liberals and against conservatives, towards secularists and against Christians. So once you understand that, many times they have provided a service. Sometimes their answers are a little bit lacking, and we understand that. And so once you go in with that kind of discernment, use it as you might. Let's give some credit also to the Associated Press. You're not going to hear that every day here, but you will hear the fact that they have, in a really dramatic way, done sort of preemptive fact-checking. And I'll just pick one of the examples. The Associated Press really has begun to come down on the Democrats for endlessly repeating this idea of kids in cages, or, of course, Kamala Harris talks about babies. Well, it's really not babies in cages, but nevertheless. And what they keep trying to point out, because it's true, is these cages were built and used by the Obama administration. These are oftentimes referred to, and will be referred to tonight, I no doubt about it, as human rights abuses, but they never, ever explain where they came from. And one of the criticisms is this is almost like in 2017, all of a sudden, then they manifest the outrage. But again, these particular facilities that they have pictures of and have shown pictures of and use so often on their campaigns are sectioned off chain link indoor pens where children come to the border without adults or who are separated from adults in detention. The children are divided by age and sex. A year ago, the Associated Press photographs showing young people in these enclosures were misrepresented online as depicting child detentions by Trump and denounced by some Democrats and activists as illustrating the cruelty of Donald Trump. One problem: the photos were taken in 2014 during the Obama administration. And so, again, as some have said, many Democrats continue to exploit the imagery of babies in cages, as Harris puts it, without acknowledging that President Obama and the Obama administration used those facilities too. His administration built the center in McAllen, Texas, with chain link holding areas in 2014. It goes on to say that they consider this one of the most persistent distortions by the 2020 Democrats. And so that's just one of many. They have some other ones that relate to everything from the Green New Deal to Medicare for All. But that one, if nothing else, is not one that involves any kind of adding up numbers, reevaluating. It's just pretty simple. The pictures that were actually outrageous for everybody, just to show in many cases that there was such cruelty on the part of the Trump administration, were pictures taken in 2014 during the Obama administration. The cages themselves were actually created during the Obama administration, built during the Obama administration. And, of course, as I mentioned before, one of the questions that would really be interesting to ask Joe Biden is, 5 million people deported. If it's wrong to deport people now, why was it okay back then? It's a question that won't be asked, but you heard it here on Point of View. Just before we take a break, let me also mention that Walter Williams, who is an economist, African-Americans, good to understand that as well, but somebody who wanted to have a little bit of fun, so this is tongue well placed in cheek, okay? So again, don't take this terribly seriously, but it's a good way to illustrate again that everybody is now being labeled as a racist. And Walter Williams, being black, said, being a racist is easy today. Years ago, he said, it was hard to be a racist. You had to be fitted for and spent money on a white gown and don a pointy hat. You celebrated racism by getting some burlap, wrapping it around a cross, setting it ablaze, dancing around it, and carrying torches. Sometimes, as Lester Maddox did, you had to buy axe handles for yourself and your supporters to wield to forcibly turn away black customers from your restaurant. Or, as the case of Will Connor, you had to learn to direct fire hoses and vicious police attack dogs against civil rights demonstrators. And he goes on to go into a little bit more, but he says all of that has changed. He says to be a racist today takes a little effort. For example, you can sit back in your easy chair and declare that he's for across-the-board tax cuts. That makes you a racist. If you don't believe me, think back to 1994 when the Republican-led Congress pushed for a tax cut measure. Former U.S. House of Representatives member Charles Ranger denounced the Republican plan before a Manhattan audience as a form of modern-day racism. Use some words I will not use on a radio program, but nevertheless, a few months later, he compared the GOP's contract with America to Nazi Germany. So for those of you who think this is a recent phenomenon, some of that happened before. One can be labeled a racist through a set of microaggressions listed in Diversity in the Classroom, UCLA Diversity and Faculty Development from 2014. Here are a few statements one should avoid. You are a credit to your race. Wow, how did you become so good in math? There's only one race, the human race. I'm not racist. I have several black friends. As a woman, I know what you are going through as a racial minority. But these incidents of microaggression are less overt. There are college microaggressions, such as a male student rolling his eyes when a female student speaks, or people not wanting to be in study groups with those of different races. Perhaps the easiest way to be labeled a racist is to suggest that a wall be built on our border with Mexico in order to keep people from Mexico and point south from entering our nation illegally. Also, a slam dunk charge of racism is to say that the standard practice of separating children from their parents is, again, racist as well. But imagine, or Nazi-like, either way, you can kind of pick your choice on this one. But imagine you are stopped with your child in your car and charged with a DUI in any one of 50 states. You're going to be arrested, and your child will be taken to Protective Child Services. The identical practice on our southern border becomes racism. Finally, he says, as veteran journalist Britt Hume said about the uproar about Donald Trump's latest bomb throwing, Trump's go-back comments were nativist, xenophobic, counterfactual, and politically stupid, but they simply do not meet the standard definition of racist, a word so recklessly flung around these days that its actual meaning has been lost. The president cleaned up his remarks a few days later, saying these are people that hate their country. If they're not in the United States, if they're complaining all the time, very simple, they can leave. By the way, leaving isn't Trump's idea. Many leftists pledged to flee America altogether if Trump were elected president. And he says the bottom line is that when leftists have no other winning argument, they falsely accuse others of racism. Republicans cower at the charge and often give the leftists what they want. Black Americans who are octogenarians, that means they are in their 80s, or nearly so, need to explain what true racism is, not to correct white liberals, but to inform young black people. So again, just a fun piece here. Today, being a racist today is easy. You used to have to be fitted for a white gown and a pointy hat and all sorts of things. Now you can just make one false statement, and that's enough to be called a racist. And again, he's having some fun at the expense of an overused phrase, which we talk about so often here on Point of View. If you'd like to read some of the things we've been talking about over this last hour on the debate, questions for the debate, Hands Off Babylon Beats, all at our website, pointofview.net. And I might also mention my commentary today is called Love Thy Body. It's a very good book that we did an interview on a while back with Nancy Piercy. Thought I would repeat it once again because it really helps you understand how we should think about human sexuality in particular and our bodies in general from a biblical point of view. And so that is certainly the case. So if you want to find some of those articles, they are available on the website. If you'd like to get my Viewpoints commentary, it's available to you free of charge. We send it to your inbox every single day. Just click on that button that says sign up, and you get my commentary Monday through Friday, Penedexter's on Saturday. Let's take a break. Carlos and Susanne Hidalgo will be with us as we talk about the un-American dream right after this.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @PointOfViewRTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, @Point of View RTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today. Last night was a Democratic debate. There is one tonight as well. And in about an hour, we're going to be talking with our good friend Gary Bauer about what took place last night. It really was kind of a debate between the progressives, Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders, and a number of the moderates, including John Hickenlooper, as well as a couple of other people, that John Delaney and some others that were part of that. We'll get into some of those details. And one of the things that surfaced is it really was a debate, some people say, between math and emotions. John Garrity, who will quote a little bit more in the next hour, put out this way: Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders take on their worst enemy, math, because there were other people like John Delaney that were actually saying the math doesn't add up, or even using some phrases that really got under the skin of Elizabeth Warren as whether or not this fairy tale economics. So we're going to be spending some significant amount of time talking about that in the next hour with Gary Bauer. We'll do it again tomorrow because we'll have Dr. Merrill Matthews. And, of course, we have our Friday weekend edition where we'll kind of give a summary of that as well. But just before we get to all of that, I wanted to make you aware of a book that I think is going to be very helpful for you, your family, your marriage, and a number of other things. It's entitled The Un-American Dream. It is written by Carlos and Susanne Hidalgo, and Carlos is a 25-year business veteran individual that made a decision to leave and start another company, Visum, and also is the author of Driving Demand, one of the top 5 marketing books of all time. We have his entire bio available on the website. And Carlos, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Kerby. It's a pleasure to be here.
Also with us in studio is Susanne, who is the co-founder of that organization we just mentioned as well, and has been involved in a variety of different activities, including teaching the producers' children. So that's kind of fun as well. We'll get into that in just a few minutes. Might mention you have 4 grown children and you live in Colorado Springs. And so, Suzanne, great to have you here as well.
Thank you so much.
It's going to be an easy name to remember because that's my wife's name, and spelled the very same way.
Same way. I love it.
It's pretty fun. Okay, Carlos, we got to tell the story because in some respects, if anybody knows you and anybody even looks at the cover of the book, they realize we're talking about a hard-charging, high-octane kind of individual. Is that fair?
That's very fair, yes. Yes, it is.
And so tell the story a little bit, because that's really the genesis of this book, isn't it?
It really is. In 2005, I co-founded an agency, and really what started as a lifestyle business. I had been traveling all over the world with a software company, had small children. I left to be able to be home. And then shortly thereafter, the business started to take off, and I got so wrapped up in the growth of the business. I got so wrapped up in making sure that we achieved certain things. And then my ego got involved, which is always really dangerous. Mm-hmm. And it really was something that I put my heart and soul into and neglected the relationships in my life that I should have been paying more attention to.
One of the things that you certainly talk about is the kind of stress and pressure that's on anybody that's in the business world, mm-hmm. and especially when you're the guy, right. Especially when it's your business. There's no, we're going to shoulder this all together. There's a sense in which, even apart from your ego, which you talked about as well, you just recognize if I don't do it, it doesn't happen, right?
Right. And I had a good team, and I think there is stress when you own a business, when you start a business, when you move up the executive ranks. I think the failing that I try to share in the book as well is I never shared that with Susanne. I never went home and said, here's what I'm feeling. I'm feeling angst. I tried to keep it all in, pull myself up by my bootstraps. And when you're keeping those secrets and really keeping that vulnerability from your partner, that relationship starts to erode.
I might just mention the book is entitled The Un-American Dream. We have a link on the website so that you can get a copy for yourself. And Susanne, let's talk about that for just a minute, because it's like, who are you? When are you going to come home? You know, I got kids. What's going to happen?
That is very much what it was oftentimes was, who are you?
Yeah.
I don't actually
Name looks
like
familiar.
this person so much anymore. Yeah. I mean, he really did turn into somebody that I didn't know, wasn't attracted to, and didn't really want to be around. And he wasn't the person that I knew that he was. And I did see this business become the most important thing in his life. And that was not okay.
Yes. I might just mention, too, if people want to watch a TEDx talk, first of all, I'm a TED Talk junkie, so those are all so fun to watch. But nevertheless, there's another way in which people can kind of hear your story as well, right?
Yeah, I had the opportunity to give a TEDx in Atlanta of November of last year to the TEDx Centennial Park Women's Group on work-life boundaries.
And I might just mention, we also have a link to the unamericandream.com. So if people want to get a copy of the book, just out, and that's a great opportunity. And just out, ultimately, I just have had a chance to look at it today. Most of the time, you probably have heard that I really almost obsess about going through and looking at every page. And this is one of those very few times not. But nevertheless, this is a great opportunity for people to learn a vicarious lesson. And that's really what you shared at the TED Talk, wasn't it?
It was. And I really believe that what God has called me to is to share my failings and my mistakes with people so they don't have to go, if they're in that same boat, to know that there's a way out. And then also to say, hey, if you're early on in your career, avoid the same mistakes I did. And I write in the book, my one note, so to speak, is to help people. And that's one of the key reasons that I wrote the book.
You know, there are two humps. One is if you're an entrepreneur trying to start your business. But Susanne, let me come to the other hump, and that is when you go through what I call the valley of the diapers, when you got young kids, the demands are so much greater at that young age, and that's exactly when it hit you, didn't it?
For sure.
Yeah.
And I would say that I felt like I was drowning in diapers at times. It is, we had 4 small children under the age of 6. I did choose to stay at home with them. I was home for 12 years until our youngest went to kindergarten. And while those were some of the most amazing years, for sure, so much fun. And such a privilege to be home with my kids every day. They're really, really hard years. And it particularly got hard when I was 7 months pregnant with our 4th child. I'm a stay-at-home mom, don't have a job. And he was let go. And so he no longer had a job.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think it was kind of a really good first test of our marriage that we both failed at pretty miserably in just that lack of communication. And like you referred to earlier about not sharing things with me and how I was feeling. And I was feeling all these things and feeling bad about the way that I was feeling because like, well, maybe I should just be pulling myself up by my bootstraps and feeling guilty that I didn't have a job and wasn't contributing in a financial way to our family. And him, you know, being told like, don't share those things with your wife. You know, those are kind of man things and here's the women things. And it was just created this division between the two of us that continued on. And it was not a way to handle a huge crisis situation in our family at that time. That was probably, I would think that was one of the most major things we had gone through up until that time.
Yeah.
2 independent people living under the same roof, you know,
sure.
And that's the case. And again, just with the kids, I always tell people that, you know, going from no kids to 1 is a huge jump. From 1 to 2 is not that much. So you think, oh, that's not bad. Then when it gets to 3 or 4, well, it's no longer man-to-man. It's zone defense.
Right.
And that's when it goes out the roof. And that's, of course, what you were dealing with as well. We have to take a break, but talking about this new book, which I know you're going to want to get a copy of, The Un-American Dream. We have a lot more to cover, and we will do so right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, the contemporary issues of abortion, euthanasia, homosexuality, transgenderism, and the hookup culture seem very different. but they all illustrate in different ways a secular hostility to the human body. That is the premise of the new book by Nancy Pearcey with the title Love Thy Body. She was on my radio program recently to explain how each of these issues goes back to a flawed perspective of our bodies. Supporters of abortion say that the fetus is not a person even though it is biologically human. Personhood theory attempts to split facts and values by ignoring basic biological facts. Homosexual activists disconnect sexuality from biological identity. This is not liberating, but actually denigrates who we are as persons. Transgenderism detaches gender from biology and also has a tendency to demean the body. And the hookup culture is often criticized for putting too much value on the physical dimension of sex. Actually, it puts too little because it only focuses on the physical and not on the emotional and spiritual as well. Nancy Pearcey wrote this book to call out those who try to argue that Christians and conservative people are anti-science. Actually, it is the secular progressive worldview that has to turn away from science in order to maintain its worldview. She also wrote the book to help Christians get beyond the negative responses. Often we're known for what we're against. We say, it's wrong, or don't do it. We need to offer a positive message, and that is another value of the book. We should also realize that these false ideas of the body aren't just outside the church, they're found inside the church as well. She provides various statistics and examples to illustrate the need for all Christians to think biblically about every area of life. This book will help you go beyond the politically correct slogans of our culture and begin to see the world from a biblical perspective. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Anti-Semitism, go to viewpoints.info/antisemitism. Viewpoints.info/antisemitism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Once again, as we talk about this book, The Un-American Dream, let me just give you as a program note, in the next hour, Gary Bauer is going to be with us, a presidential candidate, and certainly a person to join me as we talk about the Democrat debate. And as we go to our website, I might just mention at pointofview.net, we have information about the Un-American Dream, or you can go to theunamericandream.com. Either way, find all of that information. Then we have some articles on questions for Democrat candidates that George Will put together, which I think was very good. Some other things on just whether or not some of the statements made tonight fit reality and whether there are some math problems. And then one that we'll have fun with after Gary Bauer leaves, Hands Off Babylon Bee. You're going to say, how does that relate? Well, they've been in a kind of an ongoing debate back and forth with Snopes.com, so we'll get into some of that as well. So a lot to look forward to. But we have in studio with us Carlos and Susanne Hidalgo. And Carlos, talk about some of the challenges an entrepreneur faces. Even in the debates last night, they're talking about people pursuing the American dream. But it is difficult to start your own business, and it's difficult to begin to jump over all these hoops. And we talked about the valley of the diapers, but there is this huge hill that you have to get over just to get to a point where something that you started actually begins to pay you back any kind of revenue.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of challenges for entrepreneurs. I think some of the challenges that I share in the book are not going to be found in any kind of business course that you're going to take at a university. I think number one is tying our identities to our business and our professions. And I don't think God really cares about what we do. I think he cares more about how we do it.
Well said.
And that was advice given to me by a longtime mentor, which he's actually mentioned in the book. So you'll have to read the book to find out who. I think the other thing that we have to think about is we all only have 168 hours each week. And the message out right now to entrepreneurs, loud and clear, is you have to hustle. and you have to work 43 to 56 to almost 75% of your time needs to be devoted to your business. Well, then that eliminates our time to cultivate relationships.
That's right.
With God and with our spouses, with our children or significant others. It removes the ability for us to take care of our own selves spiritually, mentally, emotionally, and physically. So because we can't manufacture time, we have to be really good time managers as entrepreneurs.
Well, that gets us into one of the things you talk about in terms of boundaries. But even to talk about that, we talk about work-life balance, we talk about boundaries. But I would have to argue, and I think you would probably agree with me, that the pace of life is increased. Mm-hmm. Since I'm the oldest guy around the table, I can remember a time when if you were in a business world, somebody leaves a call, they leave it with a secretary or even maybe later with the answering machine, and people expect it would take a while for you to get back. But now when I send to a text and somebody doesn't respond, or I don't respond to a text, they're expecting my response within sometimes seconds, if not minutes. And if even an hour goes by, sometimes it will buzz again. Where are you? Why didn't you respond to me? And so if you're the one guy in the entrepreneurial activity, the pace has picked up so much dramatically that it's almost impossible, many people say, to have a work-life balance anymore. Fair?
I think it is fair. I think it's still a decision we have to make. And 70% of people will say we don't have a work-life balance. That's why I use the term boundaries. Boundaries are more permanent. But I think we can still make a choice on how connected we're going to be. And I submit that the more connected, quote unquote, we are to our devices and our social media, actually the more isolated we become, because it gives the appearance of building relationship, but you're not going to build relationship on Facebook.
Yes. What about this idea of boundaries and everything? Because if indeed you are always available 24/7, 168 hours a week, Susanne, somewhere along the line, it does seem to me that you need to say, wait a minute, this phone needs to go in a drawer. You need to plug it in, and it needs to get charged in the other room. It's not going to stay by the bed. Tell us a little bit more about this idea of boundaries.
Well, I would say that happens now, but it was a point of contention in our marriage for a long time because it didn't happen. And the attitude was, I am this important. So no, I need to have my phone on me at all times, and I need to respond immediately at all times. And you don't understand. That's what I heard a lot was, you don't understand. You don't understand. And I remember a point that we got to where he was getting ready to leave to go travel again. And there was some stuff going on with our kids, normal stuff. And I'm like, you really need to be home. We need you home. Your kids need you home. You are never home. And when you are home, you are here physically, but that's it. You are not here in any other way, shape, or form. And this has to stop. There are other people that you've hired that, let them do their jobs, whatever. And he said to me, well, there's 25 people counting on me. And I said, what about the 5 that you're responsible to first?
Yeah.
And I got no response. And he left. And that was a huge eye-opener for me to know I'm not interested in living like this anymore. Something has to change or our marriage isn't going to survive.
Well, we've taken you to the crisis. Help us out now.
Yeah.
And by the way, I'm sure there's probably a million people, or at least hundreds of thousands of people that say, I've had that conversation, or I've been around that conversation. Right. So help us out.
It's a hard conversation to have. And I had to come to the end of myself and literally hit rock bottom. And that's how I opened the book.
Yes.
Where I talk about rock bottom.
Mm-hmm.
And it was this idea that I had been doing this all for my family, or at least deluding myself that I was working myself to the point of fatigue for my family. But in reality, what my family was saying, we don't care about how much you make. We don't care about your titles. We don't care about your book, your awards. We just want you home, available, and present. And so I had to do a lot of work individually to get to that point, to shed the false identity of professional accolades make me worthy. I quote Kelly Flanagan in the book from Lovable, who says we are worthy because we have a spark of the divine. And once I accepted that, then I could start to get back to who God made me and who I truly am. And that's how I've started this new business. It's all based around, this is what God has put me on earth for, is I believe to help people in any way, shape, or form. And so I try to play that one note, even through the business and through the book.
Well, again, that is something that is important, and I want people to know a little bit more about that in just a minute. But, Susanne, you said something in passing that I want to camp on, and that is there are situations in which some of the husbands or even wives right now, because we've had some very high-powered women here on these studio chairs, that are physically home but not emotionally home. And that is understandable, especially given the fact that some high-powered women can multitask. They'll be listening to you at the same time. They've already figured out what they're going to do next, or they're even on their phone or those kinds of things. And the men maybe don't multitask as well, but that's the chronic problem. There are a lot of people right now that are listening saying, well, I'm home every night. Yeah, but you're not home physically, anything more than physically. You're not home emotionally, right?
For sure. And I heard that a lot. And it was like kind of talking to a brick wall.
Yeah.
Like there was just no emotiveness, and he lived sort of like unhinged, like set to go off at any moment, but didn't really talk about anything of importance. And it really became a marriage of logistics. This is what's going on. This is where I'm going to be. This is when I'm traveling. And it was just,
no
we
emotion.
were just roommates. It wasn't emotional. There was no real intimacy or connection in our relationship whatsoever. And, looking back, I let a lot of things go. I'm a pretty laid back person. And it was, I talk about it in the book of this, like living for someday. It was the answer to a lot of questions was, well, one day, like if I'm doing this now, one day we'll be able to. And I was like, I don't want to live that way anymore. Like I'm waiting around to live my life, and I'm not living my life. Like I want to live it right now. I don't want to keep waiting for this magical one day that you keep promising me that's never happening. You say a lot of really nice words, but there's no action behind those words. And that's what I started to notice was, I'm believing all the words that are coming out of his mouth, but nothing's actually happening. So what am I going to do with all of that?
So again, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, I want to, first of all, talk about what's on your website and how people can benefit from this, how they can benefit from the book, and even the ministry, if you will, business ministry that you put together that I think is going to be just a great ministry for individuals. And again, we have a link to unamericandream.com, so you can find out more about that. Simply go to our website, pointofview.net. But let me also do something else, and that is to open up the phones, and perhaps some of this has resonated with you. You're saying, you are saying my story. You are telling me exactly what's been happening in my marriage, my family. Maybe you'd like to ask a question, make a comment, or share a testimony, a success, whatever it might be. So that number is 1-800-351-1212. As we talk about this, and when we come back, we'll talk about why is it men don't share a little bit, and maybe some of the messages that were sent that said, no, you just keep it in, you don't bring it up, all those kinds of things, and some of the frustrations that any wife might have with a business entrepreneurial husband. So we've got a lot more to cover, and we will do so. But if you'd like to join us, we'd love to hear from you as well. 1-800-351-1212. Also, of course, broadcast on Facebook Live. You want to leave a note there, we'd read that a little bit later. All that coming up, and we'll take a break and be back with more right after this.
It wasn't long ago, it seemed, every official decision brought religious liberty and our ability to live as faithful Christians into question. Some of us wondered how long it would be before we were literally forced to choose between obeying God or men. That pressure seems to have subsided just a bit, and now is the time not to take a breath, but to work as hard as we can for the future of our nation. Thanks to you, Point of View is doing just that. And our special thanks to those who have become members of Truth Team 360. In football, 22 guys battle it out on the field while 40 or 60,000 watch in the stands, and perhaps hundreds of thousands more watch on television. We need a special few to get out of the seats and into the game. Join today by calling 1-800-347-5151 and ask to join the Truth Team, or visit us online at pointofview.net/team. We really do need you. The nation needs you. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Have a link to the unamericandream.com. We also have a couple of phone calls coming in already, so we'll get to those as time goes on. 800-351-1212. But Carlos, for just a minute, help us make our way through your website, because there's a place for your story, which is an incredible story, as people are hearing. Some reviews on the book, places where they can order it. Articles, videos, a place for people to schedule you to speak, media inquiries. I know that some of our listeners or even some of our radio stations might want to do an interview with you, maybe even for their local broadcast. So when they land on the website, talk about everything that's available, because there's quite a bit already.
Yeah, you kind of covered it. We want it to be a place where if you want any kind of information on the book, on who I am, our story, like you said, schedule to speak, you can go there, you can engage with the website, leave your email address, and then also subscribe, because as news comes out, as we do events like this, we want to make our subscribers know all the information there is about the book and all the information there is about the message that's in the book.
You know, I have a lot of listeners that say, we're looking for a man to speak at our men's retreat. I'm looking for a woman to speak at our women's retreat. And so you are available, right?
Absolutely.
Well, I'm going to go right to Audrey in Illinois, because Susanne, she says that sounds a little bit like her story. So Audrey, tell us your story here.
We are a blended family. We got married about 10 years ago, and initially we had a great honeymoon, if you would, spending time together and going on vacation. And then as the marriage went on, he became very busy and did things with his children, and he helped businesses start. So he was burning, as I put it, it wasn't the candle at both ends. He was burning the dynamite at both ends. So he would come home and be so tired, and I just knew at some point, you know, that things were going to go awry. And I started voicing my concerns, and unfortunately it did fall on a deaf ear. And when you're a blended family, it's tough enough. Throw in a wife who feels neglected or unheard. And I, you know, just fell into that waiting for someday. And I had this hope, and that so resonated with me. And then unfortunately 3 years ago, I moved out. Always had the hope that we would work things out. We've been friends, if you would, with benefits off and on for 3 years. And then 4 months ago, he took his ring off. And unfortunately, 2 weeks ago, he said he was going to file for divorce and start seeing somebody else. And so I'm at this point now where our kids are grown and in college and out of the house, and this was supposed to be my someday. And now to watch him with somebody else, and he's a Christian man, and I'm not perfect. He's not perfect, and I made my mistakes, but man, I wish we could just finish out those Sundays together.
Audrey, I am so sorry to hear that. And it is a very, very lonely place to be. I talk about that in the book. Yeah, I get often asked, like, in one word, how would you describe those years for you? And I say lonely. I was very lonely.
Absolutely.
And even with a lot of people around you, it is a very, very lonely place to be. And unfortunately, we can't fix other people. Oftentimes we hear about a lot. I don't know how much. I've done a lot of work in trauma and that sort of thing. And you hear about how people work out their own pain on other people and in relationships. And we really all have to take responsibility for ourselves. And one of the things you said that I hear often is, well, I'm not perfect either. I'm not perfect either. But we are still responsible for what we do, and nothing that anybody does in a marriage gives this spouse an excuse to behave in any sort of way. There's never any excuse for the things that we do. It is a partnership. It is a team. It is, you need to communicate and be honest. And because that's the reality. None of us are perfect in a relationship. You're never going to find anyone who's going to meet all of your needs, because ultimately that is only found in one place, and that's in our relationship with God. And until we really figure out what that relationship with Christ looks like, which I didn't understand as a 6-year-old girl who, prayed a prayer. I had no idea of the transformative work of Christ until my world blew apart. And working through my woundedness and my responsibility and who I was, and shedding all the falsehoods that I had identified myself with. I know Carlos had talked about men finding their identity in their work. And I think we as women, there are a lot of women that find it in work. I did to a point, but we also, our identity is very much wrapped up in our children. And so
Yes.
all of us are challenged with our own identity and finding out what that means and who we really are when we get past everybody else's expectations of us.
Audrey, I appreciate you sharing that. And let me just encourage some of our listeners to pray for your marriage and your circumstances. And if nothing else, Carlos, this just illustrates why you wrote the book, because you went through a journey. And if nothing else, there is this sense that some people have of, can't we just put some guardrails out instead of taking people into the emergency room? Can't we prevent them from going off into the ditch? And that's really what the book's all about, isn't it?
It sure is. It really is a call to look at success and look at our businesses and look at our professions differently. And an invitation to step off the treadmill and really focus on what's important and what is life-giving. And we are wired for meaningful relationship. That's how we were wired from Garden of Eden. That's what God put in all of us. We're not wired for work, and we're certainly not wired for our devices.
Very good. Again, we already talked a little bit about the women's issue. Let me come back to you, because one of the things I said before we went to the break is there is this kind of idea that, men just need to suck it up, and part of that is perpetuated by the media. You see kind of the guy that's the lone success, or the individual who comes into town and he's just wearing the badge and cleaning everything up. But even the Lone Ranger had Tonto. So, I mean, when you talk about this idea that you're supposed to keep it to yourself and you're not supposed to share any of your emotions, and sometimes you even have from the pulpit pastors who are careful not to share emotions because they're supposed to be strong, and they don't share it with any of the guys because, after all, you don't want to play favorites. So whether it's in the secular world or Hollywood, or whether it's even in the church, there's just this emphasis sometimes, guys, just suck it up. Don't tell anybody about the problems you have. And that wasn't exactly working very well in your marriage, was it?
Absolutely not. I think when in isolation is where shame grows, and shame can be a really loud voice. If you look at Jesus, he was an emotional guy. He cried. He loved children. I think Jesus was probably hilarious, and I think he laughed a lot. And he had an intimacy with the Father. And I think, given the fact that we are wired for meaningful relationship, when we hold part of ourselves back from that relationship, and for whatever excuse we want to give, this isn't what guys do. If you don't like men who cry, don't watch my TED Talk, because I cried during the TED Talk. But good. I think, and I'm not saying to necessarily go out and share your deepest, darkest, ugliest fears with everybody, but at least your spouse, you owe it to your spouse to say, I'm going to be vulnerable and authentic in a way that I'm not with anybody else. And that's how we can build intimacy in our marriage, emotionally and spiritually.
Talk about your family. You have 4 grown children, and they have seen this play out before them. They've seen the success on the other end. But what kind of advice are you giving to your kids, and what kinds of things can maybe they learn, and have they learned vicariously from this?
Well, when our oldest son came, our oldest son just got married, so we actually have 5 now. We have a beautiful daughter-in-law who we adore. And when he came and told us that he was going to propose to Becca, I know what I said to him was share everything. Do not allow yourself to be alone in your marriage. Be open, be honest, be vulnerable, and just share everything. And that came just from my direct experience, because I know the perils, especially for men, of what it's like to be isolated and alone. And that's, as I said, that's where shame festers, and that's where things go way off the tracks.
And again, the loneliest American male. There have been all sorts of books written about that. And again, there's one thing that I think we can learn, Susanne, is that you women, you get together and you sort of develop these steel magnolia relationships in the church. And so the women, almost every women's ministry in the church is doing well. The men's ministry, not so much. But even so, there are only certain things you can share even with your best girlfriends. And you just a minute ago talked about the fact that you felt lonely even in a crowd. And there is this phrase that some sociologists have used about crowded loneliness. So when we come back from the break, I want you to address that for just a minute, because I think right now, as we look in our churches, we see a lot of people and they're all happy and smiling as they come in the door. And you're looking at those women, but sometimes you can see in their eyes that they're really very unhappy. And there's just a real opportunity to say they may feel very alone, even though they're surrounded by a number of other women in the church. And so I want you to address that issue. And it's just one more sort of theme that comes out of this book, The Un-American Dream. So let's take a break. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212, or else just sit back and learn some lessons that you can apply to your marriage and family. We'll do more of that right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. Carlos and Susanne in studio with us. And again, the book is entitled The Un-American Dream. And Susanne, I just wanted to get your thoughts, because we see people walking into church. They all have a smile on their face. And how you doing? Fine. Everything's going fine. And you know as well as anything that you probably said the same thing to some of the people that ask you. And yet you were feeling lonely in the midst of a crowd, weren't you?
For sure. I don't think we have enough time for everything that I'd like to say on this subject, but because I think a church is it's the trickiest place because we want it to be authentic and real and vulnerable. And then there's just some sort of line that we just can't get past because at the same time, we do want people to see us as someone who kind of has it all together and has a good marriage and we all have great kids. And we'll be like, yeah, my kids aren't that great sometimes. And we'll kind of throw a little thing out there every once in a while so that we're still human.
Yeah.
But we've still got it all together. And I thought I was doing a really good job with being really authentic and vulnerable in these church groups. And the reality was I wasn't. But when you're also married to someone who's such a dynamic person who everybody loves and is such a leader, and I would be told how fortunate I was to be married to him. And I'm like, nobody has any idea what's really going on. Mm-hmm. And if I were to say anything, they probably wouldn't believe me or assume it was my fault. Or we get in our own heads, and that's where you just spiral into that loneliness. To a point where it's so hard to crawl out of. It's interesting with writing the book and where I am now, I have people coming out of all different places of my life that are like, thank you for sharing. This is what's going on with me. And just learning to be a really good listener. That's probably one of the best things that's come out of this is I just want to listen to people and be, I had so many, when the world blows apart, you get a lot of well-meaning Bible verses, or forgive and forget is a personal favorite of mine, and that I really have a hard time with because we don't forget our wounding. And, I've struggled with this for so long with pain and wounding and forgiveness and really working hard at all of that because my whole understanding of faith and who God is really evolved and expanded through all of this. And I loved how, I think it's Father Richard Rohr talks about wounding in relationship to the resurrection of Christ and how post-resurrection, Christ's body still showed his scars in his hands and his feet and his side. And that we are to remember that resurrection is not woundedness denied or forgotten or even totally healed, but it's woundedness transformed. And we will still carry the scars forever, but they can be used as a reminder for us to be mindful and to be humble so that we don't hurt other people. And that our pain transformed, is no longer pain transmitted onto other people. And so that was really revolutionary to me. That I don't want to forget. I don't want to forget any of this because I don't want to make the same mistakes again. Mm-hmm. So as hard as all of this has been, it's revealed so much in my own life and who I am as a person, and not just what somebody else did to me, but who am I in all of this and what can I learn from all this? And then how do I go about showing that love and compassion and forgiveness to other people? And when you are only able to pour out as much as you receive. And I know I have received just poured over love, compassion, and forgiveness from God. And that enables me to then pour that out into the lives of other people.
Mm. Carlos, one of the things that happened in you is you hit rock bottom. Mm-hmm. But I think there are some individuals listening right now that don't want to hit rock bottom, or they're married to someone who's headed for rock bottom.
Right.
And so talk about how they might be able to use this book or the articles, the video clips and things like that to maybe be a wake-up call, because we see so many people, to use my illustration again, in the emergency room after they've gone off the deep end. They've gone off the road. We'd like to put some guardrails up and keep them on the road, and to make them no longer have a crash or ever hit rock bottom. But the bottom line is you did, and people can learn some vicarious lessons from you, can't they?
I hope so. I certainly hope so.
Yes.
One of the things I did in the book at the urging of a friend is I put at the end of each chapter 2 to 3 reflection questions.
Right.
I would highly encourage the readers to use those and not do those in isolation. Actually work through those reflection questions with a significant relationship, primarily a spouse, and also understand that you may not like the answers that you're getting from that relationship. It doesn't mean they're against you. It just means they're being honest. And then take a risk and be vulnerable and be open-minded to learn and to listen to people who are around you, who love you, who see things that we just cannot see.
Let me just mention that for just a minute, because you have 12 chapters, and those of us that teach Sunday school classes know that there are 13 weeks in any quarter. So between that and, of course, your TED text speech and everything, it's kind of like built-in 13 weeks. You have 3 or 4 discussion questions, reflection questions, and it seems to me that although individuals can read this, some people right now saying, I'm kind of looking for something to do this fall in a small group study or a men's study or something like that. This would be really intended to be that kind of conversation too, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it really, as I mentioned, it really is an invitation for us to look from a professional perspective. And all of us, unless we're, independently wealthy, we're working, is to look at our work differently and to look at our work through the lens of who were we designed to be originally.
And you've got all sorts of videos, so it's a way in which they could show a video, have people read a chapter of the book, come back and have a discussion. I got the feeling that discussion would take a long period of time because you would get into and get past some of those false facades that would allow you to get a little bit more vulnerable, right?
Yeah, I think it really is trying to say, hey, let's break down hey, everything's fine. A lot of times things aren't fine, and it's okay for us to say, I need help. I needed help. I still need help. I need help from Susanne to live within my boundaries because it's so easy to fall back into old habits.
Yes. And I might just mention you got videos. First of all, got the TED Talk. What is the Un-American Dream video? Always connected yet feeling lonely. And these videos go on and on. So it's just a great way in which people can put that together. So 12 chapters, about 170 pages, the Un-American Dream. And if nothing else, it's just out, literally just out. So if somebody says, well, I would like to get a copy, you've made it easy for them to order it. Now, I hope it's going to show up in people's bookstore, but we just are mentioning it because it just came out today, right? So that's pretty good.
Well, you got your copy today. It's been out for a few weeks. It's on Amazon. They can just go and order that, or they can go to the unamericandream.com.
And again, if they're looking for it in their bookstore, maybe it's arrived in the bookstore, but if nothing else, we've made it very easy for them to get that as well. Any final comments for our listeners? Because, again, it's just been great to have you share with a great deal of vulnerability and authenticity what indeed you learned in this whole experience.
Yeah, I would say if I was to leave any last things, is our identity is not found in our jobs.
Yes.
Our identity is not found on what we see on Facebook or YouTube or any other social media platform. It's our identity in Christ, and we all have a spark of the divine in us. And once we start to seek who God truly made us, that's when we're going to be most successful.
What an encouraging story. And so, Susanne and Carlos, thank you for being with us today. And we look forward to the next hour, although, again, it's going to be getting into all the political issues. Gary Bauer will be with us. Of course, we had a Democratic presidential debate last night, 10 participants. Tonight, another 10 participants. Gary Bauer with us today. And then tomorrow, we'll have Dr. Merrill Matthews and, of course, Benedexter and all of our roundtable discussion on Friday. So we have a lot to cover, and we will do so. And, of course, we will open up the phones to give you a chance to ask a question, make a comment, give us an observation on what you've been seeing. And so all of that is available on our website, pointofview.net. If you'd like to know more about this book, The Un-American Dream, simply go to pointofview.net, click on that button, and you will have a lot of great information, including the videos and the book, which I would encourage you to use in your ministry. We'll be back right after this.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @PointOfViewRTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, @Point of View RTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View radio talk show. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View radio talk show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Okay, let's spend some time now talking about the Democrat debates last night. As you well know, we have about 25 different candidates for the Democratic nomination for the presidency, 5 who did not qualify for the debate in Detroit, and 10 last night, 10 more tonight. And I might point out that 4 of those on the stage last night did qualify by at least having 1% in 3 qualifying polls, but were a little below the standard in terms of the number of unique donors. And I have said this before, but let me say it again, that so far for the next debates that will take place later, only 8 have qualified. So what you may have seen are a number of people last night that will not be even on the stage next time. And so if they did not do something to get some attention or some additional donors and some traction, that will be the last we hear from them. A lot of things that I want to talk about, and of course we're going to be doing that with our good friend Gary Bauer. First of which, of course, you had the progressives, that would be Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders, against the so-called moderates, and it was interesting to see former Representative John Delaney, as well as former Governor John Hickenlooper and Representative Tim Ryan really kind of raising some questions, one of which is whether or not this is political suicide. I think Gary's probably going to agree with that. And then the bigger issue, that the enemies of both Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, according to a piece by Jim Garrity today, is the word math. The math just doesn't add up, as you might understand. So if nothing else, I thought it would be wonderful to have Gary Bauer on the program because, first of all, he's a good friend. He served in the Reagan administration as chief domestic policy advisor, is, of course, the chairman of the Campaign for Working Families, president of American Values, but also ran for the presidency in 2000 and probably has a better understanding than most about what it's like to put together a presidential campaign and to be on that debate stage. So, Gary Bauer, thank you for joining us again today.
Hey, Kerby, it's great to be with you, and I'm glad we're talking in the afternoon here. It's taken me this long to recover from what I had to watch last night.
I was waiting for your first one-liner. You know, you've been on the debate stage, and first of all, the debate stage in the Republican Party in 2000 was very different than this. But there are some statements that are being made that even, and I underscore, even the Associated Press is saying these need to be fact-checked because there are some just outrageous statements and that they simply don't add up in terms of the math or common sense, right?
They don't. I mean, yeah, the big area, of course, as you've already mentioned, is that it's easy to propose to people that you're going to give them all sorts of things and call it free. But most people learn, around the first grade or so, that there is nothing that's actually free. And when you add up all the costs of these proposals that particularly the progressive socialists are making, it would just bust every budget known to mankind. And we've already got a big spending problem. But then there's the other rhetoric, Kerby, that I think is just pure demagoguery. I mean, at one point last night, Elizabeth Warren referred to Trump keeping babies in cages. I mean, that's just insane. Even the description of children being kept in cages. When you're keeping children in detention centers, you have to make sure that they don't wander around at night. So even that isn't calling them cages is not an accurate description, but nobody has got babies in cages. So it's that sort of thing that's meant to play on the emotions, that is meant to picture conservatives and anybody that supports Trump as being evil, et cetera. It really is very hard to watch these debates and not end up throwing a shoe through the television set.
Well, I got to pick that up because there you just made my point. The Associated Press, and again, Associated Press, you're not going to hear Gary Bauer, Kerby Anderson saying, boy, Associated Press really doing a good job, But on this case, they went out and said, look, this endlessly repeating kids in cages, or as Kamala Harris sometimes calls them, baby in cages. And of course, Elizabeth Warren did the same thing last night, fails to understand, first of all, that the photographs that have been shown time and time again were taken in 2014 under the Obama administration, that these, quote, cage link indoor pens, which is probably a more accurate phrase, were built during the Obama administration, are an attempt to separate the kids based on age and sex from adults in detention, which is the best thing that you can do under the circumstances. And then even the Associated Press writer at one point said, when did all of a sudden, circa 2017, this become a problem? But before that, there was no problem with that. And because what's happening now is not unlike what was happening under the Obama administration, and the rhetoric is just over the top, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is, and it always has the same theme, which is that Christians, conservatives, Republicans, fill in the blank, that we're heartless, we have no compassion. Only the left has compassion. And, of course, the great irony in all of this is that if we actually implemented the policies the left is talking about, millions of jobs would be lost again, as we saw previously when some of these things were tried. The economic growth would stop dead in its tracks, and millions of people would end up unemployed, let alone what it would mean for countless people that would then be attracted to crossing our border because they're going to get free health care. It would encourage more people to bring their children to attempt that very dangerous trip across our border. So when you actually analyze these policies and proposals and programs, you find out they're not compassionate at all, and they're certainly not compassionate to the American taxpayer that has to pay for all these things.
One of the other things that kind of made me smile is at one point, Bernie Sanders said, I do understand this bill. I wrote the blank bill. And yet I think the criticism being made was that if you look at Section 107, I've got it right here, a bill that he wrote, or at least his staffers wrote, and has actually been endorsed by Elizabeth Warren, Kirsten Gillibrand, Kamala Harris, and Cory Booker, says that it would be unlawful for a private health insurer to sell health insurance coverage that duplicates the benefits under this act. An employer that provides that would be unlawful. And so you can say all day that this wouldn't take private health insurance away from individuals, but if you read the context of the bill, that's exactly what it does. So does he not know the bill? Of course, I understand that sometimes individuals doing an investigation of Donald Trump don't look like they've actually read all of the investigation of Donald Trump either. So I guess we've seen this before, haven't we?
Including the guy whose name is on it, as you point out. Yeah, I think this is in the category of if you like your doctor, you can keep your doctor. Only now it says if you like your insurance, you can keep your insurance. It was a lie the first time, and it's a lie this time. So, look, we all agree there's still a need to provide some additional services to people that find themselves without insurance. I think that's around 8% of the population that fits into that category now. But what the left-wing progressive socialists are suggesting is that we take away the insurance of the other 92% in order to help the 8% that still needs help.
We'll continue our conversation with Gary Bauer, and we'll also open the phones to give you a chance to join our conversation. 1-800-351-1212. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, the contemporary issues of abortion, euthanasia, homosexuality, transgenderism, and the hookup culture seem very different, but they all illustrate in different ways a secular hostility to the human body. That is the premise of the new book by Nancy Pearcey with the title Love Thy Body. She was on my radio program recently to explain how each of these issues goes back to a flawed perspective of our bodies. Supporters of abortion say that the fetus is not a person, even though it is biologically human. Personhood theory attempts to split facts and values by ignoring basic biological facts. Homosexual activists disconnect sexuality from biological identity. This is not liberating, but actually denigrates who we are as persons. Transgenderism detaches gender from biology and also has a tendency to demean the body. And the hookup culture is often criticized for putting too much value on the physical dimension of sex. Actually, it puts too little because it only focuses on the physical and not on the emotional and spiritual as well. Nancy Pearcey wrote this book to call out those who try to argue that Christians and conservative people are anti-science. Actually, it is the secular progressive worldview that has to turn away from science in order to maintain its worldview. She also wrote the book to help Christians get beyond the negative responses. Often we're known for what we're against. We say, it's wrong, or don't do it. We need to offer a positive message, and that is another value of the book. We should also realize that these false ideas of the body aren't just outside the church, they're found inside the church as well. She provides various statistics and examples to illustrate the need for all Christians to think biblically about every area of life. This book will help you go beyond the politically correct slogans of our culture and begin to see the world from a biblical perspective. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Anti-Semitism, go to viewpoints.info/antisemitism. Viewpoints.info/antisemitism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Gary Bauer with us for a few more minutes. Just wanted to get some of his thoughts. And Gary, one of the things that you and I say sometimes is that some things don't pass the straight face test. And our friends at Reason actually ran some numbers on the claims and the proposals of Elizabeth Warren and said that she wants to spend $2.75 trillion in new wealth taxes on $3.26 trillion in spending. So even there, she comes up $51 billion short. And these, when I talk about trillion, I'm talking trillion with a T. That's 1,000 billion.
Yeah.
And she keeps insisting that her taxes will only hit billionaires and big corporations. That doesn't really pass the straight face test, does it?
It doesn't, but again, it's sort of a classic example of demagoguery. You know, you're telling people you're going to give them all these things, and there's nothing to worry about because she's going to go after these incredibly rich people and these mean corporations that have all the money that really you deserve to have. And it's a very compelling argument to make the people that might be living on the edge or haven't been able to enter the economic mainstream. So it's something that Republicans and certainly President Trump will have to have an answer for if he ends up debating her for the presidency. I noticed something else last night, Kerby. I didn't hear any proposals to keep economic growth going or to create jobs. And in fact, the candidates attacked four industries, the defense industry, finance and banking as a second example, the energy industry, and the insurance healthcare industry. Well, we did a little checking this morning. There's at least 30 million Americans that work in those industries, and the proposals that were being talked about last night would effectively destroy a good number of those 30 million jobs. So it's not just the money's not there. They're recommending things that will end up sending us into another economic depression the way we saw in the 90s and the early 2000s.
Got a feeling I'm going to see that in the end-of-day report, which, again, I encourage people to sign up for. And tomorrow I've got Dr. Merrill Matthews on, and he mentioned something at a roundtable, and I did a commentary on the same point, and it was a different point. That is when you have Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren last night, and you're going to have all sorts of people tonight talk about these evil corporations. I think a lot of people go, I kind of like my corporation. Let's take a Walmart. There may be some people that say, well, they don't pay good enough wages, but I know a lot of people in rural America that say, I've never had as much opportunity to look at as many different products and at such a low price because of that. Number two is Amazon. I know people that said, I never thought I'd be able to achieve the American dream, and now I'm working at Amazon, and I'm getting $15 an hour. My engineer was reminding them they get a stock option. I did a commentary the other day in which I pointed out that they're even training people to learn how to fly drones or how to do computers. It isn't just because out of charity. They recognize they need to train the next workforce. There may be a lot of people in some of these corporations that are saying, well, okay, maybe I don't like the tobacco industry or pesticide company, but I kind of like my corporation, and all this railing against corporations might backfire, don't you think?
I think it could. I mean, at the end of the day, it's hard to be for jobs, be for employees if you're not for employers. I mean, there's no job unless there's a company or an enterprise or an entrepreneur to work for. Now, I get irritated sometimes. I particularly get irritated when American corporations forget that they're American corporations and end up transferring jobs overseas just to make a little bit more money. And I will criticize them for that, but I don't believe there's any future in our country for kicking entrepreneurs and kicking companies that provide jobs. At the end of the day, we're all hoping that our kids and our grandkids have economic opportunity as we had economic opportunity.
Let's talk about some of the positives for just a minute in the Trump administration, because the mainstream media doesn't seem to do that. If you look at the economic issues, the lowest unemployment in history sometimes for African American, Hispanic American, lowest in 50 years for women. The job growth rate, tremendous, more jobs than we have people to fill the jobs. You look at judges, and you are putting together a group of individuals who want to actually properly interpret the Constitution, and just an incredible number that are implemented there. If you're a Christian, you're saying, gosh, we certainly see a lot of Christians that have been put in positions in the administration. And I'll tell you, 5 years ago, if you told me Donald Trump would be listed by some of my pro-life friends as the most pro-life president in history, I think they'd lost their mind. But these are all positives. And if you're a Democratic candidate, it's a little tough to run against some of that, isn't it?
It's really difficult to run against it. And by any normal measurement, the president should be almost a shoo-in for re-election. And sadly, Kerby, I think the only thing the left has, and the anti-Trump big media complex that we see every day, is this ongoing smear campaign to take everything the president says and somehow twist it into charges of bigotry or discrimination or racism or whatever. It's really disconcerting and depressing. I end up spending a lot of time over at the White House. The president of the United States is not a racist. His whole career shows he's not a racist. There are plenty of black Americans that work with him that will attest to that. And the other day I saw the founder of the Black Entertainment Network,
yes,
who's made a lot of money, say that the president has been wonderful for minority Americans.
Well, and also anybody that gets your end-of-day report, because we're going to promote that again, as we always do. Yesterday, you talked about Alveda King's been on the program with us, and a number of black pastors getting together with the president. If this guy's a card-carrying racist, that would be unlikely. And of course, most of them said that was not the case. And for anybody that thinks, well, that was a hastily arranged damage control photo op, no, that was something that was planned, and he's had meetings with those individuals for some time. And so to point out in maybe what is happening in Baltimore, which, by the way, was pointed out by, say, Barack Obama, the former Baltimore mayor, Catherine Pugh, Bernie Sanders, even the former congressman who was in there. It's not racist. There are a lot of people that are. And if that's racist, then I think everybody I just mentioned is a racist as well. This phrase is being overused in so many different ways, isn't it?
It really is. For decades, the left used to call folks like you and me racist because we weren't coming up with enough ideas to help urban America. And now you've got a president that is regularly bringing up things to point out what the problems in urban America are, and then ideas on how to address those problems, and bringing up the problems is now being called racist. So you get the feeling that this is just an effort to divide Americans based on the color of our skin, which I certainly hope I don't have to remind people is the exact opposite of what Martin Luther King devoted the entire civil rights movement to, which was an America where the color of our skin would not matter as much as the content of our character.
Well, let's talk about action items. We certainly have some on the Point of View website, and I'll talk about those after you go. But first of all, if you don't get the end-of-day report, that's a must-read, and so that is available through American Values. But I think some people say, I want to get involved in a campaign. I think we need to get the right kind of people in Congress. And so for just a minute, you have a campaign for working families, and you've been identifying some of the best and brightest. And you see some of these incoming members of Congress, Van Taylor, Dan Crenshaw, and go through some ones that are just sterling individuals. We just need more of them. And that's one of the things you've been working on as well, to try to find some of those candidates and get them elected to office.
Absolutely, and we won't endorse a candidate unless they're pro-life, unambiguously, and pro-family, and then believe in another set of values, whether it's limited government, lower taxes, and so forth. And there's lots of good men and women out there that want to run for office and fit that description, and that's who we try to identify and then financially help. So people can go to our website, CWF, PAC, which stands for Political Action Committee, .com.
And again, we have a link to ouramericanvalues.org. We have the most recent end-of-day report, which I knew the new one is going to be out here in just a few minutes, and so people can read that as well. And so we always encourage people to connect up with Gary Bauer. And if you don't want to watch tonight and learn a little bit more about the need for open borders, higher taxes, and socialized medicine, then you can just listen to the conversations we have with, in this case, Gary Bauer, tomorrow, Dr. Merle Matthews. But Gary, thank you for being with us, and we look forward to the next opportunity.
Thank you, Kirby. Keep up the great work. Always good to be with you and your listeners.
There's something serious about both of us spending so much time reading these websites and going to watching these debates. But nevertheless, we do that so you don't necessarily have to. But if you'd like to join us, I wanted to have an open line this last half hour. So if you'd like to join our conversation, maybe you have some comments about the debate, I'd love to hear from you. 1-800-351-1212. Got a lot more to cover. I'll do it right after this.
Point of View is committed to spreading the truth, oftentimes a truth that those in political power don't like getting heard. But the only way it can be heard is if our teams stand strong together, if you do what you can to support the Point of View Truth Team. It's having an impact, as we heard recently from U.S. Representative Louis Gohmert.
Everywhere I go, I hear people that you have influenced, that Point of View has affected. You have made such a difference, and you rely on people to contribute, and if they don't contribute, then that truth does not get heard.
Help Point of View make a difference. Pray and consider what level is right for you. $30, $65, $100 a month, or even more, please do what you can. 1-800-347-5151 or visit online, pointofview.net. Look near the top right for the link that says Become a Monthly Partner. Join the Truth Team, 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. I'll take a phone call, but then when we come back, I want to talk about some of the questions for Democrat candidates. This comes from George Will, and that's one of the frustrations I think we always have, questions that could have been asked last night or could be asked tonight that aren't. And I think he did a very good job of really pointing out some that should be asked better now for the primary voters than later. Also got a few from Steve Guest, which I may use, but also some of you might say, well, you seemed very critical about what happened last night. Well, part of it is because it doesn't add up in terms of math, but there were some highlights that I think most of us would agree with, and one of those came from former member of Congress John Delaney that actually led to one of the zingers from Elizabeth Warren, where she said, I don't understand why anybody goes to all the trouble of running for the presidency of the United States just to talk about what we can't do and shouldn't fight for. Well, that was one that got one of the greatest applauses, but it was after he said something that made a whole lot of sense. So I'll get to that in just a minute. Let's take a few phone calls just to give you a chance to give us your response so far to the debate, and we'll head out to California. KYCC, Dwight, what would you like to add to our conversation?
Kerby, thank you so much. I enjoy you guys so much. I am a local pastor, African-American pastor in the Stockton-San Joaquin County area. And what I don't understand is you eventually run out of other people's money when you spend it. And why we don't seem to understand that. You cannot tax your way into prosperity. You can't give away anything without somehow being able to get it back in other incentives. And I'm calling just to let you know that there are many people of my ethnic persuasion that, by golly, see the light. They realize that in order to really achieve true opportunity is real freedom, economic freedom and economic empowerment. And this president, I think, is doing an awesome job with his efforts in the First Step Act and opportunity zones, and a whole host of other areas that's important. And I'm a big fan of yours, Kirk. I just got to tell you this, by the way. I'm a big fan of yours. I've followed your career for a long time, so I'm a huge fan of yours. I'm very active in my own political party here off in Northern California. It's just important, I think, that this election that we really realize, in my humble opinion, in my point of view, that if this election does not go right in 2020, I just feel like America as we know it will not cease to exist. And I just wanted to know if you could possibly just comment, or you feel that same way, or am I being a little bit hyperbole, or what?
No, I think you're right. And Dwight, first of all, I think I've got a trip coming to California here in Stockton. I know my next trip's going to Alaska, so I'm looking forward to seeing some of you up there. But I would love to shake your hand. But let me come back to the point, and that is our most recent booklet that we've just made available is on debt, and it's talking not only about the national debt, but our personal debt. But let's just talk about national debt for just a minute, because you've heard me say more than once that when people say America's broke, people hate to hear that. I said, no, America's like $22 trillion past broke. And when you have the most recent estimate is Elizabeth Warren wants to spend another $2 trillion out of your pockets and the pockets of, she says, only billionaires and big corporations. We know better. Then go and spend $3 trillion for all these programs. We just don't have the money. And there is a sense in which if we aren't careful, even under this current president, who doesn't tend to spend a lot of time and effort trying to balance the budget, if we can't get to the point where we have some kind of balanced budget, it will bankrupt this country. But it's certainly a very significant issue that nobody's asking really good economic questions right now in these debates, or asking what's going to be the impact for your children, Dwight, or your grandchildren, or their grandchildren, because we're putting just a tremendous amount of debt load on them. And there is a point in time where eventually we do just simply have to say America's broke. And I'd like to not have to say that to my children or my grandchildren. How about you?
I completely agree with you on that, Kerby. I couldn't agree more. It's just that, it's sort of like what we used to say off in my community. we would say that, a young girl could buy a $300 purse and have only $20 in it. That's how well are you doing with that? The same thing is true all with our country. We are over $22 trillion in debt. We already are facing. I mean, the only thing that is saving us, in my opinion, is the fact that we can print money while most countries can't. Barring that, we probably would have already had a collapse situation. So I just wanted to thank you, Kerby. Point of View is awesome, and you guys are awesome, all of you and the entire team. Just thank God for what you do, and I hope when you come out here to the Stockton area, I look forward to meeting you really in person. You're an awesome fellow, and I pray God continue to bless you and your family. Thank you so much.
We will try to announce it so that those of you that are listeners, for example, at KYCC, can meet me. And, of course, I've had a chance over the last week or so because I was out. I was in Vermont. I was in New York. Actually, in New York, I was at Camp of the Woods with Ravi Zacharias. He was teaching, and I was doing the seminars and met people from all over the New England area that listen to the program. So it's always great to meet some of you as well. We've got quite a number of you that want to address. Matter of fact, even one on the national debt, which we talked about in just a minute. But let me briefly mention some of the resources that you might want to actually have access to on our website. And one of those is by George Will, in which he has some questions that he would like to pose to various individuals. Last night, he would have loved to have asked a question of Senators Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders, that of the three largest accomplishments of the previous president, Barack Obama, one was the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the other was the Affordable Care Act, and the third was Dodd-Frank. And as George Will point out, he said, first of all, you opposed ratification of the first. By advocating Medicare for all, you're implying that the second one was not very much. And then railing against the corruption of Wall Street banks and capitalism, you have implied that the third one's not much. So does it follow that President Obama's presidency was not much? Would have been a good question. A good question for Joe Biden tonight, and I hope somebody asks it, is your administration, it was the Obama-Biden administration, deported 5 million illegal immigrants. You hardly heard anybody make a peep about that. I do admit that there were a few people that criticized it, but not much. So why was it okay to deport 5 million illegal immigrants under the Obama administration, but it's not okay to deport anybody under the Trump administration? I think it'd be a good question to ask. Then, of course, I had one for Kamala Harris. She's on tonight. You're considering reparations for slavery. Last night, Beto O'Rourke talked about that. And so George Will says, well, are the 1.9 million immigrants from sub-Saharan Africa who have chosen to live in America today eligible for payments? Will you share your formula for assigning degrees of eligibility? What about Barack Obama, the first African-American president? Would he be eligible? I thought that was kind of a good question there. The other one that he would ask her was you criticized Donald Trump's shredding of constitutional norms, authoritarian tendencies. He's used executive orders to marginalize Congress, but you promised to give Congress just 100 days to pass gun control legislation, and if not, you will resort to executive action. So if you become president, must the nation get used to your situational ethics? So anyway, those are just a few of many questions that he has. I'll have a few more after the break, but let me pick up one. Scott in Georgia, we were talking about the national debt. I think you have some comments, so thank you for joining us today.
Hey, thanks, Kerby. Yeah, just touching off on what you're talking about, the national debt. The whole principle of socialism only works if the people don't have enough power to take care of themselves. And I just sometimes wonder if maybe the people who are running today aren't smart enough to know that this is going on, but somebody behind the scenes says, hey, if we can bankrupt this nation for real and make it so we have a Great Depression where we all of a sudden nobody can take care of themselves anymore and the government has to step in and take care of everyone, socialism wins. And if they can find a way to get the Republicans or the conservatives to be blamed for the whole problem, then they'll win double.
Yep, and you might be right. I mean, there are some concerns that all of us have about the growing financial debt and the impact that has just on the budget, the higher and higher percentage each year of the federal budget that just goes to interest. And you eventually want to be able to pay your soldiers, sailors, Marines, Air Force, and things of that nature. You want to be able to keep the schools open. You want to be able to regulate various things, and that's all kind of up for grabs when you want to spend so much. Let's take a break, though. Tonight, of course, we're going to have opportunity for Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, Cory Booker, and a couple of others to have at it. It will be another interesting round 2, and we'll be talking about that tomorrow as well. But let's take a break. We'll come back, take a few more phone calls, and I have a few more issues to put on the table, including a few other questions that Steve Guest as well as George will have that unfortunately won't be asked tonight. We'll be right back.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
People always ask, how did they determine who is going to be on which debate stage? Because, again, you had 10 and 10. 5 did not qualify, and at the moment you only have 8 that will qualify next time. Probably they'll get up to 10 or 12, but we'll see. And it was just a random draw, but that random draw created a real problem. Last night you had all-white individuals. How do you talk about race when everybody on the stage is Anglo? That will be different, of course, tonight because you have a number of African American and Hispanic American on the stage, so maybe they can talk more about that. But just before I take some more phone calls, let me just mention that one of the biggest applause lines, and the one that almost everybody seems to be talking about, is where Elizabeth Warren kind of slapped down former Congressman John Delaney from Maryland, saying, I don't understand why everybody goes to all the trouble of running for president of the United States just to talk about what we really can't do and shouldn't fight for. And everybody cheers and everything else. But I appreciate Jim Garrity in his piece today reminds us what John Delaney said before that. and ask yourself, don't I agree with just everything this member of Congress said? Because he said, I think Democrats win when we run on real solutions, not impossible promises, when we run on things that are workable, not fairy tale economics. Of course, that really got under Elizabeth Warren's skin. And you're going to hear this phrase, fairy tale economics, again and again, believe me. If not from the Democrats, you'll hear it from the Republicans. But anyway, look at the story of Detroit, this amazing city we're in. This city is turning around because the government and the private sector are working well together. This has to be our model going forward. We need to encourage collaboration between the government, the private sector, and the nonprofit sector, and focus on those kitchen table pocketbook issues that matter to hardworking Americans, building infrastructure, creating jobs, improving their pay, creating universal health care, and lowering drug prices. That sounds pretty good. I mean, I might disagree with one of the points he makes at the end there, but Jim Garrity says, what makes him such a naysayer and a cynic? If the next president built up America's infrastructure, created jobs, improved take-home pay, created universal health care, and lowered drug prices, would you look at that legacy and lament how timid and unambitious it was? Or would you say, wow, that was an amazing presidency. I can't believe we got so much done. So one of, I think, the most positive things that came out of the debate was the one that Elizabeth Warren slapped down last night, and the one that, because of her statement, got the biggest applause. And so there is kind of this back and forth right now between the progressives and the moderates, and I use moderates in quote. I mean, most of these people that are being labeled by CNN as moderates aren't all that moderate, but I'll just use the phraseology because they use it as well. And so I think you just got some very interesting statements being made right now. But let's go back to the phones and talk to David in California. What would you like to add to our conversation?
Oh, well, hey, Kirby. Hey, yeah, I kind of wish I could have gotten on with, what's your guest's name there? My brain's seizing up.
Gary Bauer.
Gary Bauer. You know, he's, if you remember the expression, the New World Order, Gary Bauer was one of the signers of the Project for a New American Century, and those were the guys that created the New World Order. So I sure would have liked to challenge him on about 40 different things. But
and I'm not sure about that, but I'll check it out because I don't think of him as a New World Order kind of guy. But whatever. What you got a point on the debate?
Yeah, look him up in conjunction with Project for a New American Century, or PNAC. That was they had us go to war against the wrong country after 9/11 happened. The issue about privatized prisons, you know, if you look at the debate last night, the idea that all of these children are, their parents, they're fleeing from poverty, they're fleeing from tyranny, they're fleeing from drug wars, all sorts of different problems around the world. In fact, global warming is a major reason why a lot of people are fleeing from some of those countries. There are huge droughts, and thousands of people are trying to escape the drought. And what do they end up at the border? They get put into a privatized prison at $750 and up a day.
What would you suggest? Because I think what I would suggest is that we do what the president has suggested, and that is when you cross, say, from Guatemala or El Salvador into Mexico, then you seek asylum there. And so we are not in the business, nor do we want to be in the business of trying to imprison individuals. We would rather they would stay in their home country, but if they're seeking asylum, have them seek it in the neighboring country. That just seems to me to be kind of the better way to go about it. But we'll see what they say about that tonight in terms of the debate. Let me real quickly mention that I have all sorts of other questions that we didn't get to, but there was one other topic I did want to put on the table, and that is the article here by our good friend David French, who was in studio a while back, Hands Off Babylon Bee. Now, if you're not familiar, Babylon Bee is kind of a Christian site that really engages in satire. And when they make fun of various Christian groups, then, of course, we can see how that seems so appropriate. Even when they make fun of Donald Trump, no problem there. But one of the things he points out in his piece called Hands Off Babylon Bee is Snopes.com. And we benefit from some of the fact-checking that they do, and all the urban legends and things like that, they felt a real need to start fact-checking a site that does satire simply when all of a sudden the satire goes against liberals. For example, Snopes has fact-checked whether Democrats demanded that Brett Kavanaugh submit to a DNA test to prove he's not actually Hitler. I think all of us know that's a joke, but they had to fact-check that. They fact-checked whether Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez repeatedly guessed free on a TV show, The Price is Right, and then whether they had to fact-check whether Ilhan Omar actually asked, if Israel is so innocent, then why did they insist on being Jews? I mean, what he's pointing out here is that as long as you make fun of conservatives, you make fun of Christians, you make fun of Republicans, no problem. But all of a sudden, they've gotten themselves real serious about doing fact-checking on some of these liberal groups and things like that. And so, if nothing else, I wanted you to read the piece because he was basically saying, it's really time for hands-off Babylon Bee. If you don't understand satire, and I've said before that Christians oftentimes don't understand satire, nevertheless, this is something that is just a little bit beyond the pale. And so he concludes by saying Snopes can serve a useful purpose, and there's a space for it to remind readers that satire is satire. But if it wants to serve its purpose, it must not use its remaining cultural power and its remaining commercial influence to target the satire that stings its allies. Hands off Babylon Bee. And if you are not familiar with that, of course, he gives us some great illustrations. Mountain climber recovering after decision to let go and let God. Love that one. Man drowns while politically correct passengers describe what just went overboard. Or in a sign of reverence, evangelical leaders to begin writing president's name as TR-UM, kind of like Yahweh. But my all-time favorite in this article is at least the Babylon Bee report, and this is all satire, so don't believe it, that VeggieTales has introduced a new character named Cannabis Carl. All of it is a joke, and if you can't take a joke, well, don't read the Babylon Bee. But we really don't need Snopes.com to do a fact-checking on a satire site. And so, if nothing else, that's one other article we posted on the website. Well, tonight we're going to have a chance to hear from former Vice President Joe Biden, Senator Kamala Harris, Senator Cory Booker, the tech entrepreneur Andrew Yang, the former HUD Secretary and Mayor Julian Castro, Representative Tulsi Gabbard, as well as Governor Jay Inslee, Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, Senator Michael Bennet, and Mayor Bill de Blasio. And then we will have covered 20 of the 25 that are running for the presidency. That's all we have for today. I want to thank the work by Doug and Steve. We'll see you back here tomorrow.
Is religious freedom still a cornerstone of the republic, or has it effectively been crushed by the forces of tolerance? America needs Christians to be informed and as unified as possible, applying God's wisdom to civic life. Point of view can be a key part of a successful mission. I believe in America. I believe God wants His best for us. We can face whatever the world throws at us as long as we stand together. If you have not signed on, please do it now. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. Pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Or call us 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.